Welcome to In the Deep. I'm your host, Catherine Ingram. The following is excerpted from Dharma Dialogues held in March 2017 in Byron Bay, Australia. It's called Relying on How It Feels. When one is at ease, when one is resting in simple presence, we rely much more on how something feels as we proceed through life. It's sort of this gauge you just start to trust. You trust your own discernment in the moment. You don't have to so much have all your strategies lined up in advance. You trust that as you go, your own clear awareness, your own simple presence is alive and awake. Your senses are awake. And so all of the various feedback needed in any given moment, you're relying on. You're relying on how it feels. You're not as much relying on your thinking about it. Thinking is fine. The mind is a good employee, but not a good employer. Thinking is fine. We think a lot. As we go, we plan, and this and that. But what we really can rely on for the way through in the most clear, the most dharmic, the most wise, is the feeling sense. So sometimes we're going along, and you know those little signals, it's like there's a flutter in your body that just is saying, wait a minute, hang on, no. But you sometimes forge ahead for all kinds of other reasons. And sometimes you have to, but a lot of times you don't have to. There was some other confluence of decision that you felt obliged to follow, when in fact something inside is saying, oh, don't go forward further, or else step over, step around, step out, go back. And other times when you're just pulled effortlessly. And even though it doesn't look right on paper, and even though maybe all of your friends are telling you, no, don't do it that way. But something inside is irresistibly being pulled. So as we are quieter and deeper and simpler and more at ease, resting in presence, not as much resting in our stories, which aren't very restful, you develop this confidence. You develop a confidence, and you don't mind taking a chance, maybe making a misstep, because you trust that you'll feel it if it's not right. You'll feel it in time. It's all part of what I often speak about, what many people speak about, is living in authenticity, living your authentic life and being attuned to what your own frequency is transmitting to you. And it's nothing one has to make effort for. Effort is not required. Effort is in the way. It's in relaxation. It's in the non-straining. And as I spoke about last week, it's in your general contentment, whereby you feel you're feeling very abundant. As we were just sitting here for this period before I began speaking, and just before it got dark, the birds were twittering away and the wind was blowing, and I was feeling just the extraordinary experience of sitting in this nature that we enjoy here, and just the simplicity of listening to the bird song and the wind and no other sounds, really. A little bit of rustling in the room, but how privileged is that in this world? In this world where a lot of people now actually never experience that. They never are in a situation where there's no noise, no man-made noise. They're not breathing fresh air. Some people, many, many people now on earth, never breathe fresh air. The best air they can breathe is indoors. And they are not able to just hear the bird song and the wind and breathe the fresh air. So sitting in this recognition, in this appreciation, in this abundance, in as I've been speaking about, hammering on, I would even say, falling in love with the little joys of life, the little small joys which are just sprinkled throughout the day. You trip over them. But often we're distracted. We're waiting for something bigger, or we're on some miserable story, not quite enjoying the little joys. As you start to tune into those, you feel so rich. You feel so lucky. And your mind chatter quiets. It's not that it stops, and it doesn't have to stop. Mind chatter is conditioned in human animals. But the mind chatter becomes less interesting to you, as I've been saying, not very interesting at all. A little bit now and again. It recedes into the background. Into the foreground comes this experience of strong presence, of noticing lots of things, and this reliance on proceeding through your life from that quiet place where you're just trusting. There's a famous, it's the third Zen patriarchs. It's called the Verses of the Third Zen Patriarch, sometimes called the Verses of the Faith Mind, and the whole entire booklet, it is a kind of exhortation to move through life from this sort of Taoist clarity of the heart, whereby you're proceeding, you're moving from your center, and you don't have to know the whole path ahead. You just have to know how it feels to move from your center. So, of an evening like this, we're just hanging out in that. We're not learning anything, not practicing anything. We don't have a goal ahead. We're just immersing. We come together because the immersion is quite strong when we come together on this frequency. It's very helpful. And it's nothing that's not already familiar, of course. It's very familiar. Sometimes it gets overlooked, amazingly. The most lovely aspect, sometimes it gets overlooked. We get busy.
Thank you, Catherine. My question is, maybe you can help guide me. I have a repeating pattern, and I've actually become aware of the pattern, and I actually see that I'm repeating the pattern, but I can still continue to repeat the pattern. And I'm like, why do I keep doing this? And it just keeps manifesting, but I, of course, create this manifestation. So
when you say it keeps manifesting, is the pattern causing some sort of activity in your life or some sort of trouble in your life? Or
yeah, it's usually people who come to live at my house. And they like it and they don't want to leave. And I say, you have to leave. And they continue to stay. And it's like, what message am I not conveying when I say you have to leave? And they say, oh, no, you'll change your mind. You're a Gemini. You're just getting your bad part. I'm like, so yeah. I'm really confused.
I see, okay.
Maybe you can help. Maybe someone can help.
Well, I mean, of course, the first step is the awareness, and you have the awareness that somehow that a boundary is missing for you, right? That sounds like the simple way of saying it.
That's very correct, yes.
Yeah. So having recognized that some part of you, and, you know, it's sort of a very sweet and beautiful thing. You go in, you know, doubling down on trust each time. Maybe this time it'll be okay. But you may, having had this experience numerous times, you may give yourself permission to try it a different way next time, you know, and be more clear in this time, if need be, about the need for the person to go. Right. And then just maybe in your own way, that's something that's authentic for you. And when I say give yourself permission, allow yourself to know that you're not being a mean person by protecting your own home and the sanctuary of your own space. Right? You're not being a mean person, you're not being a selfish person, right? You're just being realistic to your own needs. You've got to put you in the equation of those being cared for by you.
I think that's what's the most unsettling, is that is my sanctuary, and people, sometimes they come in and don't respect. And I don't know how to be more clear, I guess. I'm not quite sure.
Well,
I guess it's the boundaries.
Yeah, and to adjust the expectations, put the expectation more on you, that you start expecting yourself to be more careful at the get-go.
Yeah, more clear
and
in
more
the very
clear.
beginning.
Yes.
What the boundaries are.
Yes.
And what I should expect.
You know, I said last Sunday at the session in Lenox, I grew up in Virginia, and
Love Virginia.
and in a time when certain types of behavior were appropriate and others weren't, and something we were always taught, it was said to us hundreds of times, is that's not ladylike behavior. Okay. So I grew up indoctrinated with ladylike behavior, which also meant that you had to be a doormat a lot. You had to turn the other cheek, you had to not say, you had to say yes when you meant no, and on and on. So then I was indoctrinated in Buddhism, also with a lot of passivity with regard to incoming problems. Right? You were to stay equanimous, right? Well, it took really a long time in my life before I was able to say no from a place, or to say this is not okay, from a really clean place inside where I felt like I was a representative of the greater good. And that I got to be included on the list of people being cared for, right? And having your home be a sanctuary, what that gives you is that you then are able to live at your optimal sweetness and kindness and generosity to all of those people whose lives you touch. So it gets down to a kind of an equation of either you're basically devoting your life to this one person living in your house who may or may not have much appreciation, and right, or you're freeing up your own energy, clarity, goodwill, good-heartedness, whereby a lot of people might benefit in the work that you do, in the people you touch, in the interactions you have, even in the way you show up for someone on the phone, right? You're freed up of that level of stress that isn't true for you, isn't authentic for you anymore. So it's really an adjustment of, this sort of nice girl, good girl, be nice, be spiritual, don't react. All of those kinds of, belief systems that are just often unrealistic and are not dharmic. Often what can happen is you get more agitated, you feel more closed down, you feel less magnanimous in general, and irritable. And also a little bit, you start getting stingy and selfish because you're just wiped out and you feel like you're already taxed to the max. So it's just a clear discernment that sees that. And one of the other things that happens is you start unhooking from the conditioning. You start unhooking from the identity, right? That's what also happened for me. Like the identity of the good girl, the ladylike behavior, the good Buddhist, the spiritual person, right? I gave up being a spiritual person a long time ago.
Yes. Well, generally these people come and it's usually a situation where they've been traumatized or,
Yes.
they've had a difficult journey, and you would think that most people would want to help them, but it's fascinating to me that they don't actually see what they do, even though I try to explain it, or maybe they do and they just.
No, I hear you, and I hear the place you're coming from and the kindness that it is. Someone I was talking with today, he was saying, I don't know how it came up, but he was saying something about how annoying it is to get phone solicitors calling. And I said, yeah, I used to feel that way a long time ago. But then my brother, the one who died, my brother Glenn was one of the most true geniuses I've ever met. I mean, he really was a genius, but he was dysfunctional. He could never hold a job. He was just could not make his way in the world. But his mind was just exceptional, spooky, brilliant. And the only kinds of jobs he could get were these really kind of crap jobs, like phone solicitation, which he could only hold even that for a couple of months. But here he was someone who struggled his whole life with depression. And he'd get these jobs this phone solicitation job where he's basically being cussed out and hung up on all day long. And he would be so beaten by it by the end of the day, And I would basically talk him down off the ledge day after day. And, and it's so, torqued my understanding of someone who has that job. That's not their plum job. That wasn't their dream job, right? They're someone who's down on their luck. It's not a great job. And especially if someone happens to be brilliant and having to do that job, something so far beneath their potential. And so, okay, what I do with that is when a phone solicitor calls me, I'm not going to just buy something from them that I don't need, but I give them the time of day to be courteous. I say things like, and it's amazing how they'll respond. It's like a kind word goes a really long way in one of those circumstances. I'll say things like, you know what, I'm really happy with my phone plan, actually. But if ever I think of changing, I'll consider your company, but I'm going to let you move on to the next one where you might have a better shot of selling. And they're always so grateful to just speak to them like a human being, you know.
Yeah, I usually tell them, it's nothing personal, but I'm going to have to hang up, sorry.
Yeah, something like that.
Because it isn't
of
personal,
course,
and
yes.
they're probably having a rough
and in
time,
a way,
like
you can
said.
say that in this circumstance too. If you're overmaxed, sometimes we overgive, right? With the best of intentions, we overspend our own resources of energy and time and money and our space, right? And so fair enough to recognize that, to take responsibility for the fact that you did agree to it, but then to, however is the best, nicest, fairest thing, adjust the situation. And again, you will rely a lot on how it feels. I'll tell one more story, a good illustrative story in this regard. When I first started having Dharma dialogues, it was in Portland, Oregon, and first I was co-teaching some retreats with Ram Dass, but they were his retreats. I was just one of the co-teachers. But when I started having my own gigs, if you will, in Portland, Oregon, I started in, I think, 94, I think. This guy was coming to my sessions. He was some kind of local professor of philosophy. He was a real chatterbox, and he loved having the floor, and he loved debating. And so no matter what you said, it's like it's a windy night, you'd have to debate it. Yeah, is it really windy? Is that wind? It's like... So it was very, very tedious, and often when he would start speaking, people in the room would start going like this. So, and I'm trying to manage the room, right? Keep the energy of the room, But I would indulge him. I was, young at doing that. I was young, period. And again, I didn't want to be mean or to scare the group or make him feel he wasn't welcome to speak and so on. Okay. Fast forward a while, he comes periodically and it's always the same, right? So then I get invited, when my book came out, my book Passionate Presence came out in 2003. I was doing a lot of talks in bookstores, and one of the local bookstores, the spiritual bookstore of Portland, invited me. It was a big to-do, and there were like 150 people, and it was a big to-do. His hand is the first one up in this in this new public space, right? So he starts on his whole thing, and I said, you know what? We have talked about these matters for several years, and I'd like to give some other people a chance to speak, and you and I can speak another time at our usual events. He got incensed. Isn't this supposed to be Dharma dialogues? Aren't we supposed to be dialoguing? I'm dialoguing with you. Or what, am I not allowed to talk? On and on. Finally, I said, I kept trying to calm him down, kept trying to make him be quiet. Finally, I said, you know what? You're going to have to either be quiet or leave. And he got up and stormed out. Now, I was expecting, and I think I had always had in the back of my mind a little nervousness about how that was going to feel in the room. Was that going to be like a horrible thing that happened, like a bad vibe? Is it going to kind of freak everyone out? Am I going to feel weird about the whole thing? But when he left, it just felt like the room had been freshened up.
Well done.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was like, I mean, really, there was nothing there was no chatter inside of me. It was just quiet. It was like every now and again you have to metaphorically get out the sword. You don't want to, it's not fun. You don't relish doing that. But sometimes it has to be done. And when you have to do it, there's a kind of clarity and a brightness, and you realize you are a servant in that moment for everybody else, you know. No one else was in the position to do it. I had to do it, you know. It's like the Grateful Dead were asked many, many years ago why they were campaigning for the rainforest. And they said something like, well, someone's got to do it, and it's a damn shame it has to be us. But it's kind of like that. It's sort of like sometimes you're on the spot, that you're the one that has to be the bad cop or the tough guy or the whatever. But if there's a clarity, you know, if there's a clarity in your heart and it's quiet and you realize, I don't want to be unkind to this person, but this has to be done. And maybe at some other point they'll see that it wasn't unkind. Maybe. That's up to them. But anyway, at the end of that session, about 10 of my usual students were lined up, basically, you know, hugging me and saying, finally you did this. We've been waiting and waiting.
A bit of coming of age.
Yes, it was kind of coming of age, yes, eureka. So, you know, it was a great life lesson for me personally. And interestingly, since the time in my life that I've been willing to do that, I haven't had to do it very much because something shifts. I like to say, you know, a great sword master, right, walking down the street in Japan, doesn't really have to get out his sword. You know, it's like you don't mess with him, you know. And so it's like that. It's like when something shifts in you and there's a clarity with your words and with your intentionality and with the fact that you're being fair, you're being clear, it's not personal, you're not identified with your role, you're not trying to be the boss or anything like that, then people hear you. Not everyone, because not everyone's mind is working properly, but almost everyone can hear you.
Thank you very much,
you're
Catherine.
welcome,
Appreciate
dear.
that.
Thank you. What I can't get used to is that we can see this new paradigm, we can see this new way, but it's those people who are specifically trying to destroy it, and especially in Byron Bay, to exploit us. And continually I see this exploitation of people coming here, of corporations, of everybody who's got something to do. They're not coming to contribute to our society. They're coming to exploit us and then go away and make money, or for whatever other reason. In doing that, they destroy the very reason that we live here and that we are here in this spiritual place. So how do we counter the destruction that's being caused by all of these organizations, people? The politicians are run by the corporations are run by the banks, and the banks are controlled by 3% of people. So that's the system that I'm aware of, and we have to get used to it. But how can we explain that there is a better way, and to counter the destruction that's being caused, and to ask from the universe, can you please give us some kind of encouragement that we can keep on putting forth these ideas to show people?
Yeah, I've been hoping for an alien invasion. Just joking. You know, the world, our time, as I've been saying these last weeks, we have our particular burdens here in this time, very special to this time. All the other previous times had different types of burdens, craziness. And this is not to say that there isn't plenty of room for action and for offering the other paradigm, as you say, offering another perspective. But ultimately, one has to whisper yes to how it's rolling out. It's like there's a Zen saying, even though it's all perfect, there's still room for improvement. That, it's a very huge juggernaut that has been, it's an evolutionary thrust that has been going a long, long time since creatures arrived here on this planet, that since all the little single-cell organisms turned into multiple-cell organisms, right? There's an evolutionary thrust. It's not just us. It's not just the recent corporations. It's not just the crazy politics. It's not just the burgeoning world population, the destruction of the environment, etc. It's been going. It's been headed in this direction pretty one-pointedly for a very long time. Now you have your life here for a few more minutes, right? A very limited time. And while it's beautiful to be concerned and to observe what's happening, I think it's important to reserve a tremendous amount of your awareness and your heart in a bow to this is how it is here. Anyway, that's how I do it. That's how I play it. There's a part of me that is just going, what? Like, how stupid is this? Right? And another part of me is saying, also, okay, this too. Right? It's how I'm facing my own death. Right? It's basically how I'm facing that. It's sort of like, it's wonderful to be here, love being alive. And also, this will come to an end. And as I said last week, the bulk of the time now is behind. Unless I live to 130. Which I don't think is going to happen. So, it's... it's the particular cross that we bear in our time because we're so privy to the information. We get it all day if we want it, and it's worldwide. What you're describing here in Byron Bay is a microcosm of what's going on planet Earth, everywhere. Right? This is one of the places that it's the least bad. Right? And it's happening everywhere. So, one can just sort of rail at the heavens and shake your fist at the sky and grumble and be depressed and anxious and angry, and or you can have a little bit of that, just because you're paying attention, and there are those moments. But my recommendation is to really get into appreciation. I said the other day in Lennox that part of the power of loss is the reminder of what is left. That's part of the grief. The power of that grief is that it intensifies your love of the beauty that's left.
It does, but should we keep on trying? This is the frustration of the whole thing. You look at it and you think, is it worthwhile? Give me some encouragement.
If it's your nature...
Why do I do this?
If it's your nature and if it's what makes you feel good... I quoted last week... my friend W.S. Merwin has a beautiful poetic line which he said, on the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. Right? So if it's your nature and if it's what makes you feel good, and if your soul is lit up by taking a stand until the last breath, right? Voting for the greater good, standing on the side of the angels till the last breath, then, right on, brother. Now, not everybody's nature is that. Some people may go quietly into the dark night. Some people may just say, okay, it's played out the way it is. I'll rest through it, right? You see it also with the way people die. Some people fight to the last minute, and not even in denial. They're not necessarily in denial. Some people maybe are, but some people just do whatever it takes until the very last day, One of my friends told me that his father, who was a big time industrialist in the U.S., he couldn't be brought down for most of his life. I mean, all kinds of ailments, but he would never stop working or anything. Anyway, on the very day he died, that morning, he told his nurses that he wanted to do his physical therapy. He was like all revved up to do his physical therapy, and he really didn't have the strength to do that, but he was wanting to do that. He was planning to do it, and then he died. Not funny, but it's just that he was sort of like all the way to the end. He was going to be doing physical therapy, And so, it's just his nature, So to really, again, in the authenticity, being true to your own nature, being real, if that's what floats your boat, lights you up, if that's what feels right to you, you go with what feels right. And it's beautiful, There's this poem I came across many years ago, before the internet, and I've never found it on the internet. And I had a copy of it. Anyway, it's by a Czechoslovakian or Polish or somebody like that. Did I quote it in here? Did I quote a poem in here like that? No. Okay. I'll say it. Yeah. No. I would have done the preamble like that. Anyway. After the war, I'm going to really bastardize it, but anyway. After the war, someone has to sweep up the glass. After the war, someone has to rebuild the schools and the apartment buildings. After the war, someone has to walk the children to school. And it goes on like this. After the war, these. So then it comes to, after the war, friends can stroll down the street and forget there was a war. And after the war, someone can lay in a field and never know there was a war, right? So it's like all these different roles that are part of the unfolding here. And it's not that one is better than the other. There's no judgment, there's no value of it, So I know that it's a conversation about, consciousness and activism. It's been going on a long, long, long time. The whole dichotomy that it can appear that, should one just immerse in consciousness and just float and just say it's all perfect, it'll all just work out however it does, even if it's extinction, so be it. Or kind of raging against the machine, sometimes overly angry and therefore not very effective ultimately. But I say there's a beautiful merger of the two. And some people are going to be more tipped on one end of that spectrum and others on the other end. But there can be a very beautiful merger of consciousness and activism. And sometimes activism is showing up in very different ways than is obvious in terms of causes, Sometimes one is just perhaps taking care of children, and maybe one of those children becomes an incredible leader, as we've seen many times in history. some of the most effective people who've had loving parents, and great education. So years ago, there was a time in my life when I was living in Marin County, and it's part of the San Francisco area, and I was going into the city of San Francisco in the evening times to go see my boyfriend and stay the night. And so I was crossing the Golden Gate Bridge at rush hour pretty much every night. And I would always try to get into a particular lane of the toll booth because there was this beautiful black man at this particular toll booth who I would often notice if the car, it was so sweet. He was always just so kind. He was so cheerful. And imagine he's in this toll booth with fumes from, the cars all around all day or evening or whatever, all night maybe he's working. And sometimes it's quite cold over the San Francisco Bay in the winter and rainy. But he always was so sweet, so lovely. And I'd notice that he'd sometimes be giving the car ahead of me, there'd be kids in the car, he'd be giving them something. So one night, he and I were kind of buddies because we saw each other practically every day. It was just a quick hello, just a little flash. But one night I said, "What are you giving those kids? What do you give the kids?" And he picks up a bag of Tootsie Rolls that he had with him in his little booth. And he said, a lot of them are on long journeys. I give them a little treat. Now, probably it's illegal to do that at this point. This was long ago. But I just thought, God, he's like this ambassador of kindness and goodness and sweetness, and he's affecting so many people, many, 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 many cars going through that toll booth every hour, right? So it's like that. You start to rework your idea of what activism is and what the effectiveness is. And maybe it's just planting a tree or just a kind word to someone who's having a bad day, and, And you start moving again from your own center, from your own deep quiet, from your own simplicity. You get out of your own way, your own agenda, your own big story, and your identity, right? And then you start moving from the most organic impulses.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask about decision making.
Yes.
Because in the last two talks I've been able to make, you point to a place of ease inside and clarity where decisions don't even really have to be made. They're just stepped into somehow. And my experience is that I have a patterning where decisions are the things that takes me back into my mind and gets me round and around, and it's where I get most stuck. So I guess I'm just going, Well,
just to be clear, it's not that I've said that decisions don't have to be made. Sometimes they certainly do have to be made.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of the theme tonight, it has a lot to do with the feeling of something. You try it on in the feeling body, right? And that takes some getting used to. It's kind of a habit, and it takes some reference of what it even feels like to try on something in the body. How does it feel in my body when I picture it? When I picture going this direction or that direction, what does it feel like? Not what am I thinking it's going to work out like, but how is it feeling? And as I said, sometimes you still have to push through. It does have to be accomplished.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like I get so caught in a habit of feeling something and then fighting against it or going into the mind to then pull it apart and break it up into all its little components and work out if I'm really feeling what I'm feeling, and then I'll feel the other option, and then I'll go back into the mind, and I end up overthinking everything so much that the feeling is not even available to me anymore.
Yeah, right. So this has to do with the ongoing habit of allowing yourself to really rest in the deepest, quietest place. That doesn't mean you have to stop the mental thinking. It goes on its own, but it can go on in the background.
Yeah.
And in the foreground is this strong sense of presence.
Yeah.
And you keep returning to that, you keep touching that, you keep affirming that in your experience, moment by moment. Just as soon as you remember to do that, remember to check in like that. And it becomes stronger and stronger. So you're starting to just then float around more as that. And then there are times when you have to think a problem through, you have to think a situation through, you have to look at the various options in terms of decision making. All of that is important. You have a decision to make, right? So you go through the list. But ultimately you can really rely on this feeling sense. And even know that if you should proceed with something and it's just not quite right, the feeling sense will let you know.
Okay. I love that. I love the extra little trust
Yes,
thing. That
and
comes,
an extra willingness to change the course if need be. Right.
And something came up for me as you were speaking about when I'm in presence, then I can really hear what you're speaking about, being in presence and bringing it to the fore. But when I'm not in presence, then I feel like it's a million miles. I mean, I think it's the similar story that most people share in different forms, but my mind will try to find presence, but it's already through the wrong place somehow.
Yes,
so
right.
it's hard to find how to drop back.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like one of those, those visual books whereby there's an image and there's and it looks like a holographic creature pops out of the image.
Yeah.
And suddenly, at first you're just looking at a bunch of lines on a page, and then suddenly there's a deer in the forest.
Yeah. And
you're not quite sure how you were able to see it, right? But something about relaxing, and you're not quite sure how it happened, right? And then you can always see it. You can kind of always return to it. So it's like that. There's some way in which, there's just this, you just sink again, and then it's just obvious. There's nothing that you've discovered anew, really. It's just you've returned. And it becomes so sweet, that habit, and you start to rely on it so strongly that the other habit of a lot of mental noise, of a lot of just neurotic chatter, of a lot of identified thinking, identification in thought, having to pump up a story, all of that is so tiring, just wearying.
Yeah.
So that contrast starts to get really strong.
I actually, as you were speaking as well, I really got how when I'm not seeing the 3D holographic, how I'll have an expectation that I should be able to see the 3D graphic. And so there's the beating myself up pattern that's separating me more and more from the dropping in.
Yes.
And so then as you were speaking about the beauty of finding that second place, I was already in the beating myself up place. So I'm just really speaking what I'm, what's coming to me in this moment.
Yes, very good. Yes, and what you're saying, I think a lot of us over the years have had that, that I've heard that many, many times, thousands of times, that's an extra layer of stress that is unnecessary,
Yay for layers. Oh, my. And Any other hints for finding holographic pictures? Any magic wands?
Just relax. Make no effort. Just relax and make no effort. Really,
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a trick. We hear this phrase, make no effort. Punjaji used to say it all the time. This is primary teaching, make no effort.
Yeah.
And
the effort to make no effort is quite profound.
People will make that phrase. They will make it effortful somehow. It's like they're straining to make no effort.
Yeah.
And there's no trick about it.
Yeah.
There's no right. And then when those moments occur, when those moments occur where you really are, it just comes over you and you realize, oh, this is so easy. And you realize, oh yeah, there was no effort, right? But sometimes we forget later, and you find yourself climbing the mountain again, and going loop-de-loop around. So.
Thank you. I'm feeling quite, I can feel quite a bit of fear going on, so it's good I'll sit with all of this and find my non-effortful effort or something. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's also just a soaking that happens in a context like this, whereby, you're just, the words they're just pointers, they're just an excuse somehow. And really it's a frequency, it's a vibe that we're sitting in. And that's the power of an evening like this. It's really not in the teaching so-called or the words. It's sitting in the space.
That's why we came.
Very
Even
good.
though I hadn't planned to.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
Why are we like that? Why are we such rebel to our own cause? Why are we so bad at going to what's best for us? I don't get it.
I don't either. Yeah, well, we're very, clever monkeys. And you see how some of the chimpanzees and other of the monkey groups behave with each other. It's not pretty, although the bonobos are nice. But, we're conditioned creatures. And we happen to be extremely successful at manipulating the world, to bending things to our liking. And so here we are. This is now the result of the clever thinking animal. And fortunately, along the way, there are some, I said the other week, a couple of weeks ago, that through time, there have been certain beings who have spoken this very same truth, this very same experience. Over centuries of time, we have that record. And that there have been many people of our species, many creatures of our species, who have seen this, right? And many who haven't. And be grateful that you're one of the ones who has. It's, as I said last week, it's the only sanctuary there is. It's the fast track for a beautiful life. It's the fast track for a relational life, for a life of the heart, of the mind, in terms of the more interesting stuff that's offered here. And just be grateful, on your knees grateful, and what to do about how the human species behaves, right? If you look at history, if you look at medieval times, if you look at almost any of the previous times, it's pretty shocking, right? And what even goes on today in this world, it's shocking. But again, counting one's blessings that by some kind of extraordinary grace, You live among the gentle folk. You live here in the Shire. So, that you just kind of, and then with that understanding of one's own abundance in this, of one's own privilege, it inspires to, what is the phrase? To those who much is given, much is expected, that you give back the best you can. And it doesn't really do much for you to be taken down by the poor situation of I don't mean poor in terms of poverty, I mean poor in terms of ethics and of kindness of the world that goes on, And I've said, you've heard me say, I live with a broken heart. I added, I pay attention to the news and I see what happens, not entirely, obviously, but I watch a lot of the news. And it's just, you're just stunned by it, After all this time, still continue to be just stunned by it. And yet, it's like Isa said at the grave of his 13-year-old girl, Isa, the Japanese Zen poet, he said, "This dewdrop world is indeed a dewdrop world, and yet," standing at the graveside of his daughter, right? Yes, this is a blink, it's a dewdrop world, here and gone, right? And yet, in the dewdrop here, right? It's rich, it's intense, it's beautiful, it's horrible, it's everything, and you as a feeling one, as an empath, you have to bear a lot of it. You have to bear it best you can, and thankfully you have the Dharma. Thankfully you have a place that you can be in your own case. So like for me, many, many, many times, there's a phrase that will come to me, go to quiet. Like if something is getting intense or just some, whatever, when I was unpacking, there were helicopters overhead dumping water. There was a fire nearby, and we were listening to the radio to see if we were going to have to evacuate. And I was unpacking my belongings that had just arrived after being at sea for a long time. And it was just all so ironic and everything. And every now and again, a little bubble of fear would come up, and a little bubble of not just fear for my life about having to jump in my car and get the hell out of there, but also a fear about all my stuff and, all this collection of art that people have given me and all these things that I had treasured, could go up like that in smoke. And I would feel this little, but some old habit that I rely on would come in and say, go to quiet. I would just then keep unpacking the stuff. If I have to run, then I'll run. So like that, and it seems to be the theme for the night, is that you're trusting the clarity, the quiet, right? The wavelength that you're resting, that you're living on, you're trusting that to be your guide in any given moment. Because see, I could say, and I won't because I can't really say it, but people will give you all kinds of stories in answer to your question, why is it like this? People will tell you all kinds of cosmological theories. I've never found any of them to be persuasive. That it's some big test and it's some big karmic thing and it's some kind of crazy God play, Leela. On and on. I've heard lots of the rumors, but I haven't been persuaded by any of them. I love Leonard's lines. Let's see. What do you think of it? Though all the maps of blood and flesh are posted on the door, there's no one who has told us yet what Boogie Street is for. Boogie Street being life, yeah. So they're filling up the libraries, right? All the different theories and the religions and the philosophies and the traditions, and they're all posted on the door. You can find them all. But no one has told us yet. And so this is a mystery we live in. This is a gigantic, fabulous mystery. This has been In the Deep. You can find the entire list of In the Deep podcasts at katherineingram.com, where you can also book a private session by phone or Skype, see the schedule for Dharma dialogues and retreats, or make a tax-deductible donation in support of this work. Till next time.